Goodbye, Iraq.
All right, brother.
The last American combat brigade in Iraq leaves the country. Is it really the beginning of the end or a tactical streamlining of U.S. forces there? Can the Iraqi army secure a country still racked with instability? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. The Americans are calling it a drawdown of forces, and that is exactly what it is. The last combat brigade left Iraq on Thursday, and although 2 weeks ahead of schedule, this is far from the total withdrawal President Obama had promised during his campaign. 50,000 U.S. troops will remain, their mission now officially a supporting role. Now, in a moment, we'll talk about just what that's going to mean, as well as the overall reduction of troops. But first, Rosalind Jordan takes a look back on the lead up to the invasion, some of the key moments in the war, and the developments which led us here.
It's a day these U.S. soldiers never thought would come.
Goodbye, Iraq. Happy to be going home.
The U.S.'s combat mission in Iraq ending after 7.5 years. The march into Iraq began in 2002. With George Bush and Tony Blair accusing Saddam Hussein of building and planning to use so-called weapons of mass destruction against the West.
We cannot stand by and do nothing while dangers gather.
Even though the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1441, which called on Saddam to reveal all the details of his weapons programs, many nations opposed the war, their citizens taking to the streets in opposition. But the U.S. and the UK were unmoved. And the invasion of Iraq began on March 20th, 2003.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Soon after, coalition forces took Baghdad. Saddam Hussein went into hiding. And then, on May 1st, 2003,
major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Bush's words came years too soon. Investigators never found the alleged weapons of mass destruction, and the country has yet to become a cradle of democracy in the Middle East.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Saddam Hussein was found hiding near his ancestral home of Tikrit. The interim Iraqi government hanged him for crimes against humanity in 2006. Meanwhile, the country continued its descent toward all-out sectarian war.
Good afternoon and welcome to the White House.
At the end of 2006, Bush fired Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, long accused of running the war on the cheap, and replaced him with Robert Gates.
I will serve with all my heart.
The next year, General David Petraeus was given command of all U.S. forces in Iraq. His mission, bring the violence under control. In 2008, the U.S. then struck a deal with the government of Nouri al-Maliki to remove all its troops by 2011.
I opposed this war in 2002. I will end this war in 2009. It won't be easy.
Barack Obama built his presidential platform around this promise. And though the troop drawdown started several months late, the now President Obama has largely been able to keep his word. But is the U.S. really leaving Iraq in better shape than when it invaded in 2003? Suicide bombings are killing Iraqi civilians with increasing frequency, including this attack on a military recruitment center on Tuesday. The outgoing U.S. ambassador speaking on Tuesday in Washington.
The security problems are not ones that have broad political significance. They have terrible significance for people involved in them, obviously. But they are the kinds of security problems that are not somehow shaking the political structures.
An optimistic assessment that no doubt will be tested in the weeks and months ahead in a war-torn country still struggling to stand on its feet. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, General Babakar Zabari, the Iraqi chief of staff, had a different opinion about when the U.S. troops should draw down. Here's what he had to say.
The US has 50,000 actual combat troops, but the problem will be after 2011. So we have to work with the Americans, the West, or the regional countries, because the Iraqi army will be ready only in 2020.
All right, well, joining us now to talk more about this are our guests. In Baghdad, Mahmoud Othman. He's a member of the Iraqi Parliament. In Atlanta, Lawrence Korb. He's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense and is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. And in Amman, Adnan Hayajni, Professor of Political Science at the Hashemite University. Mahmoud Othman, if I could start with you. You heard the Iraqi general's comments there. He thinks that his forces in the country need another 10 years before they will be ready. Is he right?
Well, I don't know, but I think he's a military man, and according to his experience in the military services in Iraq, he's chief of staff, I think that's his assessment. He thinks that the Iraqi force wouldn't be able to defend the country before 2020. That means to defend the country against outside aggression, to control the Iraqi skies, the Iraqi borders. That's what was his assessment. Of course, others differ, but we in Parliament also, we have heard words like that, not exactly 2020, a bit before that, from Minister of Defense when he was in Parliament sometimes, and from other military responsibles. They were discussing the Iraqi-American agreement and the defense implementation and the defense implications of that. So we have heard such words. So I think the military, maybe, they know better, and they think there is not enough training for Iraqi forces, not enough armaments. That's why they may not be ready to take the task after 2011 to defend the country against outside aggression.
Adnan Hayajni, do you think the Iraqi forces are up to the job?
Well, thank you, first of all. I'm not sure if the Iraqi forces are up to the job. They went through so many trainings so far, and security situation has not improved in Iraq. And many people, I think, they concentrate on security in terms of the absence of violent actions, the absence of bombs, the absence of killing. But they do not even think about security of food security or job security, other types of security. The forces, I think, they are in number, they are about 400,000, I think, combining the army and the police forces. But I'm not sure if they are well trained. They have so many internal problems, and I think in terms of they do not have a unity in terms of the army does not represent all of Iraq. There's a mistrust among the army. There's a mistrust between the American forces and the army. There's a mistrust between the political parties, the political components of Iraq and the army. The army, there is no such army for Iraq. One Iraqi army that will fight for all of the Iraqis and defend all of Iraq. It depends who is in the government. So I am not really sure if there is a single army that will defend Iraq. It is made up of so many factions that they are not loyal to Iraq. They are loyal to their sections, they are loyal to their political parties, they are loyal to outside forces, but I'm not sure if they are loyal to Iraq. And the army, especially in the Arab war, should be neutral, should be fighting to protect all the people, not the political parties, not the political individuals.
Lawrence Korb, from the point of view of the U.S. Military, what does this drawdown really amount to in terms of the reality on the ground? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, a soldier with a gun is still a soldier with a gun. I mean, these might be in a supporting role, but they're still essentially equipped in the same way that they were equipped before.
There's no doubt about it. The fact of the matter is the United States is still going to have 6 brigades. Now they call them advisory and assistance brigades, but they just changed the name. They still have an awful lot of combat power. And I think what we have to distinguish here
is internal threats and external threats. The United States forces in June 2009, by the demand of the Iraqi government, had to withdraw from the cities and towns and back to their bases. They can only go out, or since that time, with the permission of the Iraqis and the request of the Iraqis. So for all practical purposes, their role in dealing with internal security ended in June 2009. Now, the question of external security is a different thing in terms of, will Iraq be able to defend itself from, outside aggression? And after 2011, I think that's an issue that the United States and Iraq can work out if the Iraqis want it. Just as, for example, we have troops in Korea to defend against North Korea, but we have never been involved in the internal goings-on in South Korea. So I think it's important to keep in mind that we still have an awful lot of power there, and we can only be used at the request of the Iraqis. And I think the professor's exactly right. For 400,000 people, they should be able to maintain internal security. The real issue is, do they want to? Do they have the motivation? Do they have the loyalty? Do they see themselves as Iraqis or loyal to a particular sect? And that will not change until the Iraqis basically have a meaningful political reconciliation.
All right, well, Iraqis on the streets of Baghdad have different views about the latest U.S. move. Here's what some of them had to say.
What we hope for is for all the U.S. troops to leave Iraq once and for all, for Iraq to become united again as one, and for a new government to be formed to lift the country up.
It's difficult to have a set opinion on this issue. It's confusing. If the American forces leave, sectarian violence will reemerge again. But if they stay, that might be harmful too, though to a lesser degree. So perhaps it's better if they stayed.
It's not going to be safe if the Americans leave. We want them to stay. We'll feel lost without them. We'll feel like a nation without a father. We'll feel like orphans. We want the Americans to stay, and perhaps they can solve our problems. Our government is not strong on its own.
So what if the American forces left? It's not like we cannot depend on ourselves or live without them. Before the Americans came, during Saddam's days, and even before him, we didn't need a foreign country to manage our security. Iraqis were in charge just fine. There's no such thing as we're no good without them.
We can't trust the Iraqi security forces to be in the lead, because until now we don't have leadership. And even if the government is formed, some confusion will remain. They will need some time to be at the helm alone.
All right, so a range of opinions there from some Iraqis on the street, but I think one of the themes that was running through there, through some of those opinions, Mahmoud Othman, was the concern about Iraqi forces' ability to do the job, and also the political uncertainty in the country right now. Is this a bad time for them to be drawing down their forces, given that there is so much instability at the moment?
Yes, well, I think it's very good for the Americans to implement the Iraqi-American agreement and to go out according to the timetable, but it only comes at a time which is awkward, which is not a good time, because the political forces till now, after 5.5 months of election, they haven't been able to make even a breakthrough towards forming the government. That is the difficult thing. It has created a political vacuum. At the same time, some security deterioration is there, and the Iraqi people are suffering. That is the time. The time is not so good. If there was a government formed by the political force in place now, things would have been much better. That's why people are a bit worried about that. And I think the American side, they take care and they are concerned about what's going on inside America. I think Obama has promised his people to go out on time, and he's doing that. And I think they are caring about the half elections of November. I think they are caring about what's going on in America more than what's going on in Iraq. That's why they are sticking to their timetable regardless of what happens here in Iraq.
But Mr. Othman, you're a member of parliament. People look to you for leadership on this. Do you not think that there's a responsibility on legislators like yourself to come to an agreement and form a viable government here? I mean, we're nearly 6 months on from those elections, and the government hasn't been, we don't have a viable government yet. Isn't that also contributing to the sense of instability in the country?
Certainly it is. I think the main responsibility is for the Iraqis, the Iraqi political leaders, the Iraqi legislators who were elected. They are responsible more than anybody else for what's going on. I think they haven't shouldered the responsibility. They haven't done a good job. They haven't been able to be flexible to form the government. They have put sometime their own and their own interest, the interest of the bloc before the interest of the nation. That's why, yes, they are responsible, and they are more responsible than any other people, even more than the Americans, definitely, for what's going on inside the country.
Lawrence Korb, what are we to make into the timing of this drawdown in the United States? I know you're not a politician, but Mahmoud Uthman touched on this in his earlier answer. We're in the middle of a tough election season in the United States. President Obama's Democratic Party is in a fight in the U.S. Congress to hold their majority there. I mean, how much is this to do with that in mind, that this is essentially for domestic consumption in the United States? He wants to be able to tell the American people, I'm living up to my promise of taking American troops out of harm's way.
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that President Obama in his campaign said he would do this, and he is implementing this proposal. But I can't emphasize too much that it was President Bush who agreed to get the troops out of the cities and towns in June of 2009, over a year ago. And he also agreed to get out by the end of 2011. So even if President Obama had not campaigned on that, he would be essentially doing the same. And I think it's also important to keep in mind, I remember when the troops went back in June 2009, it was important for the Iraqis because they didn't trust us. They thought we were going to be like the British and come and stay for a long time. And the fact that we kept our word, I think, is very, very important. And while there's no doubt about the fact that some Iraqis are concerned about what's going on, the real problem, as the member of parliament pointed out, is they've got to form a government. There's nothing we can do about that. That's really up to them. At some point, we would have to leave, and they've got to take their future in their own hands. No doubt about the fact that it plays well in the United States, because after it turned out that the reasons we went to war were not true, Americans are happy to end this involvement. But I can't emphasize too much. This is the Iraqis wanted this, and we're doing what the Iraqi government has asked us to do.
Adnan Hayajni, as long as the country continues without a long-term government, isn't this just opening up a bigger window for the old divisions to re-emerge?
There's no older divisions in Iraq. Iraq was a unitary country until the Americans invaded, I think, Iraq, until the American war in Iraq. And now they're saying, well, we made all of this mess and we cannot fix it. And we cannot even make all of these political elite that came, most of the political elite that they're fighting with each other over the government, they came with the American forces. And the American forces and the American government failed, I think, to bring a new elite. And they cannot even, after 7 years, with the same elite, figure out a new government. They made up all of this mess, and now they're saying goodbye to everybody, and they're saying we cannot even use our political maneuver or influence to influence these political parties in order to agree to form a government. They are not interested, I think, in anything. I think they're interested in moving out the forces and saying goodbye to Iraq after they achieved, I'm not sure what kind of objectives they have achieved in Iraq, but it is a question, I think, to the Iraqi themselves. I've been saying this for many years. It is for the Iraqis to decide themselves. Now the Americans are leaving you. You have become addicted to the Americans. You cannot live without them. You cannot do anything without them. Now you have to live in your own. Now they left you 50,000 troops to train you. I'm not sure what they train you for. They have failed themselves, I think, to achieve any of the objectives. And now it is up to you to form a government and to look inward and to look for your future and to decide what kind of Iraq do you want. Without the Americans, we cannot continue continue American bashing and blaming the American for everything. They have made all the mess, and that's all.
Mahmoud Othman, let's put that to you then as a member of the Iraqi parliament. A lot of the responsibility rests on your government. Where do you go from here?
Well, I think a lot of responsibility lies with the Iraqis. That's right. I think this is their country. They should have been ready better than what they are now in 7 years to rule their country, because I think the Americans will go anyway. If not this month, they will go another year or 2 years. But the Iraqis should have the responsibility to rule their country, to build their forces, to defend their country. And I think there is something which is lacking here, is reconciliation first, and then flexibility in dealing with each other on how to form the government, how to be flexible towards each other. They are not flexible enough. There is not enough reconciliation. There is a bit of political and sectarian differences and conflicts. All these are factors which delay the formation of a proper government. I think they have to do the job. They have to take the task. They have to build the government. And I don't blame U.S. to just stick to their interests. I think they are sticking to their interests more than Iraqis. And I think the Iraqi ones, or the Iraqis also should stick to their interests, solve their problem, build a government, and at the same time try to build up their forces. I think the Americans didn't do enough to train the Iraqi forces, to arm the Iraqi forces the way they promised. But anyway, that's a problem, and we have to deal with it. And important thing is now to form the government as soon as we can, and then gradually go towards building the forces. I think that is what should be done, because Americans would leave anyway someday, and we have to shoulder our responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, Lawrence Korb, the American presence there is not open-ended. They've made that very clear. So where do you see this playing out in the long term? Are we going to see, I mean, in recent days, we've seen a deterioration in security. There was that bomb attack outside the Army Recruitment Center that killed at least 60 people. I mean, again, this goes back to my earlier question that this is opening up a window of more uncertainty here.
Well, again, I think there is this uncertain period, but it's not the American leaving that makes it uncertain. It's the fact that the Iraqis cannot form a government. And I think if the United States would try, as the professor said, to get involved in the political process, they would be seen as interfering in Iraqi internal affairs, which would anger some people. And it's the future of Iraq is in the hands of the Iraqis. I was opposed to the invasion. I think we've made an awful lot of mistakes. But I think we came in and we had the so-called surge in early 2007, and the idea was to quell the violence enough so that the Iraqis could make the political compromises necessary for reconciliation. Even though the violence has upticked now, it's certainly lower than it was in 2006 and 2007, and it's really up to the Iraqis. I mean, for example, it seems to me Prime Minister Maliki came in second in the election. He ought to step aside and let Alawi, who won, even though it was now, try to form a government. If he would do that, I think that would go a long way toward dealing with the problems that we've all been discussing here today.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time, but I want to thank all of you for taking part in the discussion. In Baghdad, Mahmoud Othman. In Atlanta, Lawrence Korb. And in Amman, Adnan Hayajni. And thanks so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.